Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Noxcast, an Equinox news recap podcast. I'm your host, Charlotte King. I'm the managing executive editor of the Equinox.
And I'm Nathan Hope. I'm the administrative executive editor of the Equinox. And this week we're joined by our arts and entertainment editor, Hayley.
Hello.
Hello. We're glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
For sure. Before we get into all of the news talk and everything, we do have one very exciting announcement, which is that Noxcast is officially on streaming services, including Apple Podcasts. I know last time in the last episode it wasn't quite ready to be on that yet, but Apple Podcasts, Spotify, it'll continue to be available as ever in video form on YouTube. It's also available on iHeartRadio and the Podbean app. We might look into some other future options as well, but for right now, those are all available for your listening convenience and pleasure. So hopefully that is good news for some of you who prefer to use some of those services or just like an audio experience better. That's kind of our one announcement. I'll turn it over to Hayley if you want to tell us a little bit about your role as A&E editor and sort of how that came to be.
So I'm a first year, so I pretty much within the first few weeks of campus after the activities fair. Is that what? Yep, that's what's called. I found out about the Equinox, and I'm a film major and creative writing minor, so I was very excited to try new ways of writing. So I quickly joined the Equinox, and then after that, I heard that arts and entertainment was open, and I thought that was pretty much right within my field because again, I'm film creative writing. So I was really excited to be able to go for the E-Pro position, which I somehow did get, and I'm very happy that I got it because it's been a really cool experience.
You say somehow.
Yeah, somehow.
We saw that Hayley was writing for a lot of different sections and putting out some high quality stuff, and at the time we weren't really sure who was going to take up the A&E mantle, because at the time I had been A&E and then became managing at the end of last school year, and I was still kind of facilitating that, and we were looking for somebody who could take over in a full-time capacity. And so we knew we wanted to have Hayley do something, but we weren't sure where your interests might lie yet because we didn't know you too well, because school year was just starting out. But when you expressed interest in A&E, it was kind of a no-brainer. But so we're very happy to have you, and we're very happy to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you.
You wrote two thwant for this past week's paper, an opinion piece and a review. So I also want to give you the space to kind of talk us through those. You want to talk a little bit about the hikers' opinion, the hikers who were rescued by a New Hampshire fishing game?
Yes, this was definitely the funniest story I've had to write about. It's about these two hikers, which I don't know if both of them were inexperienced, but I know at least one of them were not experienced with hiking in the winter. And they took a very long hiking trail. Blizzard came up. They got lost with pretty much nothing. So New Hampshire Fishing Game had to come rescue them. And they were missing $25, I think they're called hike safe cards. And honestly, I've hiked a few times, didn't know these existed, and I will definitely be getting one for the summer. But honestly, these are super convenient because with these cards, by only spending $25, you save yourself from spending hundreds or thousands of dollars which is the cost of rescue, depending on what you rescued from. And I thought it was funny that these guys were completely new, but didn't look at what to prepare for and didn't prepare for something, especially in the winter. And honestly, it's funny because one of the guys was like, yeah, I completely understand why we're paying, because, it made perfect sense, but it was super funny to read about. But glad these guys are okay because it could have gone a lot worse. I think they were found before the end of the day that they were lost, so that was good.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, glad that nobody ended up, lost forever. So always a good thing to have fishing game as a resource. But, yeah, I did also think I caught on to the detail you mentioned in the opinion that one of the hikers in question was kind of like, hell, if they don't charge me, I'll give a donation. Just happy to be safe and sound. But yeah, crazy story and definitely kind of a wake up call for any prospective hikers that, you might need a little more than protein bars if you're going to go do some potentially treacherous winter treks.
Yeah, I think it's cool. Also, just that you, Hayley, can like write in so many like different sections and are really kind of like versed in all these different things, like student life, also some pieces there, sports, and also opinions. It's cool to see sort of the byline of like arts and entertainment editor writing the opinion section or the sports section, or like recently when we've gotten our like senior photographers to chip in on the writing side, it's like cool to see people sort of go outside their like strongest wheelhouse and then go into something different and still put out some really cool and interesting things. So I definitely think it was a nice little opinion piece about, again, like a very interesting story. So yeah, it was cool.
Yeah,
for sure.
I love writing opinions because I can make jokes. It's one of the best parts, but also because I get to learn about stories that, aren't the biggest thing because we'd put that in news, but it's so funny to see what's going on in opinions and be able to put my opinion in something. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's why it ends up being opinions tends to be one of our good like kind of gateways for people who want to like try their hand at writing, but they're not sure how they feel about like the more, straight up newsy side of things yet, but you can try your hand at an opinion, kind of get a feel for how we do things. And then if you're interested, you can always take something else, jump between sections. But yeah, a fun one for sure. The other thing, like I mentioned, that you wrote was an album review of the most recent Snoop Dogg album. So I'll toss that to you as well to talk about that.
Yeah, so this was released mid-December of 2024. It's called Missionary. What I was first intrigued by it was because I found one of the songs recommended to me on YouTube Music. It was Last Dance with Mary Jane, which was produced by Dr. Dre, and then Snoop Dogg and Jelly Roll featuring it. And honestly, I really liked the song, so I listened to the rest of the album. And when I looked at the album, I was really surprised because it had so many other artists. It was just a huge collab project. Honestly, I don't listen to much hip-hop, if any. I usually just listen to pop, like 2000s type stuff. So listening to something with a different genre was super fun and interesting to have all the artists in one album. Definitely worth the listen. Definitely not for studying, but if you're cleaning your room, you need to pop something on, this is definitely the album to do it, especially if you're looking for something hip-hop.
Yeah, I thought it was a really cool perspective to sort of see, how you viewed the album as someone who's not traditionally huge into rap or hip-hop. I think there's value in any review, certainly new or old, or if you're familiar with it or not, but it definitely gave an interesting take on sort of what the album is like to listen to for someone who, isn't already super into the genre or, Snoop Dogg's past work or anything. But yeah, it was a really cool little review. Well, not really little. There's a lot to be said about it. But, really gave the whole rundown. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and from like a news perspective, I always think it's cool when we can feature a review of something that is like current. Especially with the fact that obviously we publish all our stuff online. And so, as you pointed out in the review, like maybe this isn't necessarily a hit album with the Keene State community, but certainly, you got to figure from an artist as prominent as Snoop Dogg, like there's going to be a lot of people in the online music space that are like discussing this and maybe have some of the same thoughts as you, maybe have totally different thoughts from you, depending on their like background. But that's kind of cool to be able to like localize it in the sense that you're like bringing attention to an album that maybe not like a ton of people on campus know about, but also contribute to like the discussion overall and provide like a unique perspective of like a first time listener who has a different background than maybe some other people who are checking this album out. So yeah, a cool one. And definitely, I love a good, just like super in-depth album review. And that went kind of crazy with the word count. I'm not going to lie.
I'm sorry, bro. Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, I got to say, they cooked on that album.
Yeah.
I couldn't stop talking about it.
Sometimes it's like that. I've had reviews where I'm just like, this one's just going to be a beast. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, cool stuff. All right. With that, I think we can get into kind of the recap proper, talking about our top stories. But, in keeping with having Hayley on, we'll talk about A&E first. And so the top story from A&E this week was a story by our senior reporter, Ryan Pacheco, about a featured performance / lecture from Virginia Eskin. This was this was in honor of Black History Month for February, highlighting some compositions from some different Black artists and kind of going into the history as well as some crossover with pieces that are featured in literary works. So kind of a cool blend of a lot of different disciplines. And I know this is part of a kind of ongoing schedule of performances and other events that the music program does. But cool to spotlight this one.
Yeah, honestly, when I first heard, I thought it was just a concert, and then I heard that was a lecture, and it made me want to go even more. I couldn't go because I think I was working, but what I loved is that they had somebody come in and teach like a whole audience of students and community members about pieces in honoring Black History Month, and I like that it was a performance and lecture because that really gives more depth to what I'm not going to say entertainment, but what they're teaching the audience. And I think that definitely a good way to kick off Black History Month, and also a bunch of more performances coming to the Redfern.
Yeah, I think it's cool, across all departments on campus to be able to sort of look into some prominent, Black historical figures in the respective fields, because there's certainly, people in any field on campus who are prominent and played a big part in sort of these different art forms as we know them today. So I'm glad to see that, and I think it's really solid event coverage of a very interesting event that does kind of blend both of those, the performance aspect, but then also the teaching aspect. So it's it seems like a very engaging thing.
Yeah, I think that, we certainly have spaces and organizations on campus that are more directly, like their mission is more directly involved with something like Black history and bringing that to a wider audience. We have a DEI office, we have the Black Student Union, we have these dedicated spaces, but it's also always cool to see, other organizations or programs or whatever it may be across campus still show up and say, okay, it's Black History Month. Let's kind of involve ourselves in that in a way where we can, bring to an audience who, in this case, is more directly focused on just music as a whole, still show why Black history is relevant to music, is important to this discipline. And so I think that's it's always cool to me to see, other people across campus say, we got to make sure that we do something to recognize that. All right, with that, I think we can shift into talking about our news section this week. A quick aside from our top story in news this week, one other story we also thought was important to talk about was another piece by our senior reporter Ryan, kind of delving into a national issue and localizing it, which is some of the executive orders that have been coming out from the Trump administration, and in particular that which has to do with immigration and policing around that, and particularly the raids that ICE has been conducting, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the removal of some of the limitations as to where those raids can be conducted. So Ryan in this article was particularly looking at how that can impact Keene as a whole, but obviously in particular the Keene State campus. So yeah, definitely an important topic to get info out to those who may be affected.
Yeah, I think it's a really good example of trying to take a more national issue and seeing how it affects the campus and the city of Keene in particular. A lot of people have questions about, how does this thing at the federal level really impact, our own backyard, really? And this article is seeking to answer that. And I think, when I was working with our news editor, Tim, on coming up with some ideas, that was something I had in mind. And I was thinking that Ryan would do a really good job with it, and I think he did. And it's really, a lot of people are searching for answers about this right now and sort of what it means. And I think he got a lot of key pieces of information, mainly that the Keene Police Department chief said that they wouldn't assist in immigration enforcement as it relates to non-criminal migrants who may be undocumented. Due to the already heavy criminal caseload, they essentially said that they really wouldn't have the time or resources to do it anyway. And then, another piece is that President Treadwell said the university system is working on sort of ways to combat some of the attacks on DEI and some of these heightened immigration enforcement measures. And then third is that students who are here on a student visa from other countries, we don't suspect, or the Global Education Office head doesn't suspect, that they would be at risk, which is certainly something that bears importance to our campus and having a lot of international students. So it's definitely frightening for a lot of people, but I think the article did a lot and did a good job in sort of clearing up any potential concerns or impacts relating to this. And there's still, a lot to be said, of course, but we definitely thought it was good to put out there on socials.
Yeah, having this story out, just as like an overview of what Keene is going through when it comes to ICE, I think that was good to have out. But what surprised me the most is that now students, both like at any level, like high school and also college, are at risk of ICE raids, which I don't think makes sense. I mean, I feel like students, that like school is a safe place for so many people, so many kids, so many students. So having that now at risk of an ICE raid, I feel like that is not what we should be working towards.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, that'll, I think, do for that. Moving back into the realm of top stories, kind of a combined discussion of our top news story as well as what we focused our editorial discussion on. One of the other sort of big ticket items from this week, there was a lot going on this week, was the results of the most recent KSC Dining inspection. So that includes the Zorn Dining Commons as well as the retail spaces of Lloyd's Marketplace, the Hoot and Scoot, and the Sizzler area. And Nate, I'll let you talk about this, but definitely ended up being a little more timely than we expected.
Yeah, something that you always look at when you're a news editor, as I was for about a year and a half, was any inspections done, particularly health inspections at, the dining areas, but there's also other ones like environmental inspections, et cetera. But I had noticed that in 2024, there wasn't an inspection performed. The last one was in the fall of 2023. So we were kind of looking at, was there an inspection done that wasn't posted about, or is there one coming up, or is that anything they're bracing for? So I had told Tim to sort of look into that and put that on the news budget. And our newly elected copy editor, Chloe, as of this past week, did the due diligence of sort of investigating what's going on there. And upon getting an interview with Jen Farrell, who oversees the contract between Chartwells and Keene State, found that just that past Monday, there was an inspection done on all of the spaces, and that the DC scored a 69 out of 100, an 11-point decrease from the fall 2023 inspection, and the retail spaces scored a 98 out of 100, nearly perfect score, which is an improvement from the fall 2023 inspection. So sort of a quick pivot of that story, going from was there one to there was one, and this is the results. And sort of taking into account, the inspection letters, what they were docked for, getting comment from those who are directly involved in Chartwells, and also some student opinion. I think it was a really well-rounded story and a really good example of you never really know what to expect when you're going out there and asking these questions. But as with any story about, the KSC Dining inspections, it's going to be the top story because this is something that impacts basically every student, has an experience eating at the dining hall, especially on campus, but even off-campus students like, myself, I, buy food from Lloyd's as well, and sometimes go into the DC with, guest swipes. So even, I think everybody's familiar with it, and it's sort of something that's both, concerning and something to just look at and be informed about rather than just, people have their own opinions and positive and negative views just in general, but seeing like the view of an objective, inspector and what to expect and sort of, I just think, the results were very, I don't know, I was a little bit caught off guard by the low number of the DC, I'd have to say.
Yeah, actually, I tried Hoot and Scoop for the first time last week after hearing the story, and I've been going to Lloyd's a lot more after hearing it. Because the first semester I liked the DC, that was usually where I went. But I feel like since the beginning of this year, like even before we heard about the inspections, it was kind of like things were always empty, and then after hearing about this, like most of the things that were going on were simple things like not keeping like dishwashers to temperature. It wasn't getting up to the heat it was supposed to and stuff like that. But it's also like I don't know where I was going with that. It's pretty much just simple things that I think that are very important. But one thing that I remembered was that there was no lids on the toppings near the ice cream, and the other day I was there and someone put ice cream in with the sprinkles and mixed it around, so I couldn't have sprinkles. I was sad. But that's like lids are gonna be very important for that so it doesn't keep happening.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the big points that we hit on in the editorial discussion is like it's weird to look at how polarized the results are, because you look at like how well the retail spaces are performing versus the sort of sudden drop in the rating of the DC. And so I think the question we ended up having was, why can't these seemingly effective practices that are helping improve, Lloyd's or the Hoot and Scoot or whatever it may be, why can't those be implemented at the DC to, similarly improve the performance over there? And I think that, in terms of the discussion we had, our e-board has some real diversity in terms of how long people have been at Keene State, how familiar they are with KSC Dining overall, or just food service. A lot of us have worked jobs in the food service industry. Nate, you work at a restaurant right now. As well as, a lot of us have either personally have restrictions on what we're able to eat, or know people on campus who do have similar restrictions. And so, we definitely think that there is like a reasonable path forward for KSC Dining to improve. We just don't know exactly what steps are going to be taken, but we're hopeful, and we genuinely do want, we just want for students to be able to have the best possible experience with dining, because, food is such an important part of life. And so people who, especially people who are living on campus, but any student who spends time at Keene State, that's such a significant thing to kind of have squared away as part of their experience. Moving into our top story for region and state, we've got kind of another doozy. There's a piece from news editor Tim, shout out, who went kind of in depth in talking about what's been going on at Norwich University in Vermont, which is a private military institution. And the newspaper over there, The Guardian, has been having a lot of issues with their ability to operate as a free organization of the press. With the administration at the school, they've kind of been told that the doors are shut on their operation, and so it's been tough for them. But Tim tried to kind of get the scoop coming from an outside perspective as a fellow media organization, and try to kind of nail down the objective story of what's going on over there.
Yeah, talk about a big news week, and I've been really impressed with how quickly Tim has been able to acclimate to the position of news editor, and sort of the first week he had the breaking news, and then a more traditional news article, and then also this in-depth piece out within the first couple weeks here. And I was very impressed with the thoroughness. And, as someone who's also, had my fair share of investigative reporting, it's a very gratifying thing, but also a very tough thing to do, as always, and sort of tackling a lot of people who don't want to talk with the phone interview or an in-person interview. They might want to only give email statements or send you over, certain documents that pertain to certain elements, but not others. It's a very tricky thing to really, dot all the I's, cross all the T's. But I think it did a good job in getting, all the viewpoints that could possibly be gotten, or really reaching out to everybody, and those who wanted to, comment on it were able to speak their piece. But very big story that I think probably might have flown under the radar otherwise. But I'm glad that we got a piece out about it. And I think, a threat to sort of student media at Norwich is, a threat to student media anywhere. And, as a student media organization ourselves, it's something that we want to sort of look at and, monitor when there's things that happen, near us, and sort of give an outside perspective, like you said, onto the situation. It seems like there was some retaliation going on based on some of the hard-hitting reporting about things that were happening at Norwich, and being able to report on it as, a public institution versus some of their limitations as a private institution certainly was valuable.
Yeah, going off what Nate said, like, the fact that Tim could get so much information about a story that not a lot of people want to talk about was really good. But I just think that the Norwich paper that they shouldn't have gotten suspended in the first place, because the story they got suspended for was completely justifiable. It was something that happened, and it happens. They said it was suspended. It shouldn't have been published because it wasn't something that threatened the campus itself, but it was still something big that happened and something that needs to be talked about. So yeah, they should not have been suspended for what they were writing about.
Definitely. I mean, that's the kind of, big story that is kind of like, it can get ugly. It can be hard to talk about, but it's essential to have press who can just get that info out to people, because it matters, and it's something that any community deserves to know about. So definitely some really kind of scary interactions between press and power over there, and I'm grateful that we were able to contribute what we did. That Tim was able to kind of dig in and help shine some light on this. All right, let's move into our top story from student life this week, which is covering Keene State's chapter of Alpha Sigma Phi. They've got an annual fundraising event where a selection of the brothers have their heads shaved to raise money for some various philanthropies that they're partnered with. This is one of a few different charity events that they do per year. Pretty much any Greek life org has sort of their selected partners that they work with. But, this is, I think, a good way to do some good while also kind of putting on a good show at the same time.
Yeah, I think, every Greek life organization has those like heavy hitter events in terms of these are big drivers for their fundraising. And for the past, few years at least, Alpha Sig has done this, head shaving event where they have different goals in terms of, if they reach a certain money goal, then this person will get their head shaven. And sort of it kind of goes up in terms of like intensity, in terms of like this person has a lot of hair to shave. And so that's why it'd be a higher ticket to reach there. But it's kind of also, an extension of the general festivities. They hold it, after winter celebration, and sort of collect donations throughout that day. So it was a cool, very visual story also. We got some great photos from Emily Swift, one of our senior photographers, and our senior multimedia reporter, Jake, did really cool video on it. And, in the event also, they had a few people who weren't originally slated to have their head shaven, and they just ended up participating because of all the money that came in, which was more than they had anticipated. And I think when all was said and done, over $3,000 were raised at the time of the event, around 2,000. So some late arriving donations, and, all these donations, of course, go to the causes and, philanthropies that they support. So it's a cool little event for the community that kind of is part of the Keene State traditions in terms of Greek life.
Yeah, I think that them raising $3,000 is crazy. I don't know if I'd shave my head, but so I have to give kudos to these guys because these guys are way more brave than I am. But I do have maybe a little more hair than they do. But I think that this is like a super fun event to do, and the charities they chose were really good for their causes. And I think that while this got a lot of donations, also kind of showed what their group is like in general.
Yeah, I always think it's nice to see any, org or whoever it is on campus, like, kind of be able to put those two things together of like, hey, let's kind of show up and show, what we're about and the fact that, like, we care about these important topics, but also just be able to kind of, like, have a good time and bring people together for those causes and again, just, like, put on a show. And then I think that already brings us to our top sports story for the week, which was kind of a fun, like, offbeat, but also kind of relevant with the big game coming up. This is from our sports editor, Jakob, who talked a little bit about the conversation of who's the GOAT when it comes to the NFL. And so obviously, in general, but especially in the New England area, there are few people across really any sport who have as much of a just like legacy as Tom Brady. But in recent years, Patrick Mahomes has kind of stepped up as another potential contender for the title of GOAT. And especially with the Super Bowl coming up, people are definitely talking. But this was a cool opportunity to just talk to some people on campus who are big football fans and kind of get that perspective from them.
Yeah, I think it's another example of sort of trying to localize a more like national conversation. Of course, Tom Brady had a long history with the New England Patriots, and Keene is in New Hampshire, which is in New England, of course. So there's a lot of people who have strong opinions about his career and the legacy he left behind, and a lot of people who think that nobody else might be able to touch that level. And, even if Mahomes ends up being part of the winning team on this upcoming Super Bowl, that he would still be quite a few rings behind Brady, just from a numbers standpoint. But it's an interesting conversation to have even at a campus without a football team. There's a lot of people who are really huge fans of football and sort of getting their opinions on the issue. And then this piece also in conjunction with a separate piece that Jakob did about just the Super Bowl in general. I think they went really well together and were pretty complimentary. So it was some interesting coverage for sure.
Yeah, I like the spin on the news, on the sports story. But honestly, I do not know much about football. I'm not gonna lie. I did. My family is huge with sports. I did, I think, 9 seasons of flag football when I was a kid. But so I didn't go a day without hearing the name Tom Brady, especially since we're in New England. We all know that everyone loves Tom Brady. But I feel like, I don't know if this is like the bias talking, but I feel like Tom Brady is probably the legend of football. Like, if you hear Tom Brady, even if you don't know much about football, you're going to know who Tom Brady is. So I feel like he is definitely, at least in my opinion, probably better. But, like Nate was kind of talking about, if, any student on this campus knows anything about football, or like my brother and my dad came on here, they'd be talking for at least an hour. So it's good to know that Keene is kind of talking about these things.
Yeah, well, one thing that I thought was kind of funny that Nate said was, like when we were reading over the story, was that, some of the people that Jakob interviewed for this story, they could have their own sports podcast and just like yap about stuff like this, because there are people who know their stuff, man. I'm with Hayley. I'm not a huge football fan myself, so I don't really know. I don't have a super like informed take on this, but there definitely are people who can like speak to this, and so it was cool to get their perspective and just kind of like dig into it a little deeper. All right, with that, I think that kind of does it for our recap this week. I, as always, want to extend our thanks to the composer of the music for Noxcast, our very own Equinox alum, Zach Keenan, as well as the designer of the graphic for Noxcast, our very own art director, Elijah Fisher, and, of course, the editor of Noxcast, our very own multimedia director, Jakob Hall. We will be back next week for another news recap. Until then, I've been your host, Charlotte King.
And I've been Nathan Hope, and thank you for tuning in, and thank you to Hayley for joining us this week.
Thank you.